Welcome to UFHL Now! A close-up look at the ultimate fantasy hockey league. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes. High reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's domination in the UFHL, and the mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to another Friday edition of UFHL Now, where we take a look at the most realistic, simply the best fantasy hockey platform that there is. It's on the blockchain, on the Zilliqa blockchain, and these aren't just fantasy players. They are NFTs, digital assets. So it's so exciting. There is so much going on within our league, around our league, with other things. There's going to be a big announcement this weekend on the UFFS podcast. So really excited to be a part of this and to be talking about some big moves in our league this week. First of all, I'll let you know that we are a part of the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. You can be a part of it if you have a fantasy sports show as well. Hit us up on Twitter at UFS Network. You can also get us on email at UFSN at UFF Sports, and you can reach me at Ducks Domination on Twitter. On the show today, some who's hot, players making some moves. We'll take a look at the top 5 penalty minute leaders in the UFHL, because penalty minutes are a category, and we can all debate, and we will debate in the off season about different categories, but that's what we're going with today, is taking a look at the top 5 penalty minute leaders. We will have a look at our top 5 standings. Larry Fisher is dropping by with a giant bag of insider information. It is legendary, this week's segment. There's a lot of stuff that has happened that we need to talk about, and we are going to award somebody who participated in our merchandise giveaway contest from last week, as we were talking about the best and your favorite logos in the UFHL, and that is going to feature a special guest. Some people call this special guest the Great One. So anyway, we have all of that coming up and much more as we get going on UFHL Now.
You're watching the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, your one-stop fantasy shop. Get in touch on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us, UFSN at UFFsports.com.
The one thing I really love about being able to do this show on the UFSN is really gives me the opportunity to look into who's playing really well in the league that particular week. And we go back to the last Friday when we talked. So this is a Friday to Friday information. Our league resets on Monday as far as call-ups, but it's, as everybody knows that plays in our league, it's not a head-to-head until we get to the playoffs. So here's who I thought was really good this week in the UFHL, and that's Carter Verhaeghe. Filled out a lot of categories, really hot right now, and Barkov is out for Florida, and that's the Monarchs' gain, as Carter Verhaeghe hit every category since last Friday, and he avoided giveaways as well. That's like a Price is Right game or something like that. He just won both showcases. The Monarchs won both showcases thanks to Carter Verhaeghe. So amazing work from Carter Verhaeghe. 5 goals, power play points. He had a decent amount of hits, also game-winning goal for bonuses. As mentioned, every scoring category we have, he hit on it. So it's like Lotto Verhaeghe this week. Also, Matt Barzell, Blades of Steel. They get benefited from his balanced attack, and they love that. 4 goals, 4 helpers, 12 shots on goal. Some sort of math equation in there. Also pitched in with +4. And that was only in 3 games since last Friday. So Barzell making the most of, most guys are getting at least 4 games, unless you're the Canucks right now, they're getting none. And watch out for Nathan McKinnon's Gator Bite. Top 10 point guy who also roughs it up. Perfect for the UFHL. 14 of those 16 penalty minutes came in one game, on one play against the Coyotes. He got into it, had 4 minutes for roughing. It was with Connor Garland. And he also received a 10-minute misconduct. So wasn't like he was dropping the gloves, but maybe get the elbows up a little bit. That never hurts a star player to protect himself a little bit and rough it up. Help out the old reputation a little bit. So impressive stuff for those particular players, but there's more. Mackenzie Blackwood. A lot going on with the Yetis right now, including some solid net minding from Blackwood, a win, an overtime loss, and a shutout to go along with 84 saves. Good enough for 17.8 points this past week and the last 7 days. 44 of 48 shots he stopped in the overtime loss to the Bruins. So impressive stuff. 9-9 on the season in 20 starts is the goaltender. Shea Theodore drove the Express this week. 6 points, solid hit and takeaway numbers for Theodore, who is leading the offensive attack in Vegas from the blue line, and he is doing it for West Coast also. And finally, Jonas Donskoi coming up big for the top 10 Grizzlies. Bonus points for game-winning goals. That is great. Power play points help out also. Too bad there isn't a bonus for hat tricks or really fast hatties. He had 3 goals in the first period versus Arizona. In the first 7 minutes and 31 seconds of the game, he added an assist later on. He was on a 2-on-0. Could have went for goal number 4, passed it off, and picked up the assist anyway instead of getting a 4th goal. So impressive stuff right there from Jonas Donskoi in picking up the Hattie and having a great week as well. All right, let's take a look at the top 5 penalty minute leaders in the UFHL. You have Brendan Lemieux of Red Army. Yeah, they need somebody to protect all those stars. Coming in first, Curtis Gabriel, right there as well. Trent Frederick, Matthew Olivier, and Eric Gudbranson. And you notice that there is a common theme there. Kamikaze. Yeah, they're the new Broad Street bullies, these guys. 3 of the top 5 in there representing the penalty minute leaders. And so I went and looked at breaking down what these guys have for particular penalty minutes, because we saw Nathan McKinnon. 1 game, a 10-minute misconduct, helps out the PIMs a lot, along with a couple of minor penalties or a double minor. So when you look at Brendan Lemieux, here's how it breaks down. He has 12 minors, 3 majors, and 2 misconducts. So 20 minutes right there coming in misconducts. And, that obviously helps out. But obviously this is a guy who does rack up the penalty minutes as well. So it's not like he's only getting the misconducts and things like that. But he does have 20 minutes of his 59 penalty minutes is coming from misconducts. All right, Curtis Gabriel. He leads the UFHL in fighting majors with 5. He also has 5 minor penalties and 1 misconduct. So there you go. I think a fight changes the game more than a tripping penalty, but I do understand that in fantasy, we're looking to give value at as many different players as possible. So I do understand penalty minutes. But Gabriel, he's getting it done with fighting majors, and it's showing. Trent Frederick right behind him with 4 majors, 4 minors, 2 misconducts. And then Olivier has 11 minors, 3 majors, and a misconduct. And Gabranson has 10 minors, 3 majors, and a misconduct. So an interesting look at how different guys are getting their points and points for their teams, particularly when it comes to picking up the PIMs or dropping the gloves. All right, some movement in the top 10 this week. Interesting. Red Army still holding firm with the number 1 spot on top. And I went on record saying I did not think they would be caught. They still have over a 50-point lead going into this weekend's action. The Titans, though, slip back into second. They swap places with the Ice Vikings, who were second last week. The Royals and the Outlaws stay where they are. Rock Republic moves up a spot to 6. The Stingrays move up 2 spots to 7. The Yetis drop from 6 to 8, and the lot of movement going on with the Yetis, as you're going to hear in our UFHL Insider. The Grizzlies drop a spot, and the Brutes staying the same as they were. But when you look at the top 10, that race for 2 and 3 is going to be really, really interesting. And then that back half of the top 5 could be interchanging throughout the season. So some really, really fun races. Always love when there's movement. And I always love talking with my good friend Larry Fisher. We are going to get to that after this on our UFHL Insider.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL now!
Always fun to bring in the UFHL Insider, Larry Fisher, joining us. And man, Larry, sometimes it's quiet, not very often. Most times it's very busy in the UFHL, and a lot of times it comes in the same 3 or 4 days. And kind of that was the case this week. A lot of things going on, but we are starting with some big news regarding an expansion franchise that we no longer have to call them just an expansion franchise.
You're right, Dean. And we teased it last week's episode of UFHL Now that this would be the week that the expansion franchise took on a name, and we have the name. The owners, the general manager, Drew and Darwin and Brennan, put their collective heads together, and they came up with a very unique and neat name, something that no other sports franchise has ever used and likely will never use because it's very unique to their brand. But the UFHL expansion franchise is now known as the Bentley Jacks. 2 words, the Bentley Jacks. And there you see their logos, very sharp looking. You got to love the color scheme. It's it obviously mirrors NHL Seattle Kraken, the NHL expansion franchise, with the colors, which I think was a really nice touch to go with those colors. The Bentley, obviously, as you see from the logo, is the breed of the dog, Bentley, which the owner, majority owner, Darwin Assman, he has a Bentley, so he wanted the Bentley in there. And Jacks, again, Darwin owns Ace Lumber and Building Supplies in Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan, a lumber hardware company. And it kind of goes with Jacks being short for Lumberjacks. So a very cool name. Some people might laugh at naming a franchise after your dog, but I can't because one of my fantasy teams is the Tenacious Terriers, which the wife had a hand in naming, but it's after our Yorkies. So I can relate to going that route. And one of my Dynasty League teams is the Seattle Kraken. So I love the colors. I love the fact that because they're the UFHL's version of the Seattle Kraken, that they took it to that level and wanted to incorporate Seattle into their brand and into their color scheme. So welcome to the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League, the Bentley Jacks.
I love that. And, when you talk Terriers, the Yorkton Terriers are actually kind of goes along with what you had in your fantasy team. But I think those colors and that graphic is absolutely sharp. And I'm really impressed by them. I'm glad they took their time and, got it right because as I look at this again, I just love the kind of the incorporation, as you meant, of the colors from the expansion team. And I love this, just the secondary logo with kind of the buzzsaw there going through sticking with kind of the lumber theme. That is absolutely beautiful.
And the other thing there, Dean, is look at the hockey stick that the Bentley dog is holding. It's an axe. So you got the Lumberjacks in the primary logo as well. So just very creative, very cool brand. And obviously he's wearing sort of the plaid, the lumberjack type outfit as well, the Bentley. So I think they knocked it out of the park with just the uniqueness of the logo and the name.
If we would have had that logo last week, I think this would have been the logo that might have got the most votes in our Who is Your Favorite Logo merchandise contest. We're going to announce the winner of that at the end of this show, but that is an absolute beauty of a logo. Congratulations to the Bentley Jacks. Looking forward to you not getting a very good player from Duckman's domination in the expansion draft, but looking forward to making some deals with you. And speaking of deals, wow, we kind of teased last week that something was going to happen with the Yetis and a new GM. It did happen, and there was no dipping their toes in it for the new GM, was there?
Not at all. The new general manager, Scott Lowater, and funny, his last name's Lowater, and dipping the toes, and you can say he jumped in with both feet, right? I mean, he made 5 trades in his first 24 hours, or his first 2 full days on the job. He made 5 trades, and including 4 that could be classified as blockbusters, just massive deals. So Scott Lowater was a late entry into the GM candidacy. The Yetis had already interviewed a handful of candidates prior to Scott Lowater jumping on Telegram and announcing he's interested. And I think what happened there was Adam Stevens, formerly the GM of the Outlaws, who stepped aside for health reasons. He was ready to come back. He's serving as the assistant GM with the first place Red Army. And I think Adam was maybe the front runner just because of his past experience in the UFHL. And I think they just couldn't agree on contract terms and compensation. And Red Army stepped up and retained Adam Stevens. And then there were some other strong candidates, including a potential affiliation with the Five Eyes Scouting Service and bringing their team into the UFHL. But then Scott Lowater arrived on Telegram and, expressed interest and connected right away with Allen, and they hit it off. And I think Scott Lowater's real world experience, he's built some of the best junior B teams rosters in Alberta over the past decade with the Coaldale Copperheads. And prior to that, he was GM and director of player personnel, manager of some of the elite level minor hockey teams in Lethbridge, Alberta, with Bantam AAA and Midget AAA, and did some coaching there as well. So he has the real world experience, and certainly he's had a lot of fantasy experience. Me and Scott go way back. We were roommates back in 2002 to 2004 in Lethbridge, college roommates, and we started playing fantasy hockey then together in leagues, and he's still in my main keeper league. We're actually playing head to head this week with second and third place on the line. So we have some money riding on it this week, myself and Scott, in our head-to-head. But he's a great guy and a guy that I knew would be very active and very eager to make moves and be a strong representative for the Yetis. So I did put in a good word for him as well. And he was emerged as a successful candidate. Like you said, wasted no time in making an immediate impact for the Yetis.
So that was one GM move that we saw, and there potentially could be more with another team, which is a bit of a surprise, I think, for both of us.
It is a surprising twist that Xavier Smith and Brian Hernandez of Californication Scouting, but Xavier Smith, the owner of Dynasty, who took ownership in November, and really overhauled and brought that franchise back from, I don't want to say the dead, but the Dynasty franchise was decimated. He took it on as a reclamation project. And here we are not even 6 months later, and Dynasty's actually sitting in 16th place at the time of this recording. And, Dynasty was ranked in the preseason power rankings 31st out of 31 out of 31, 31st overall for this season. So the fact he's taken that team to a middle of the pack status, and the moves he's made to overhaul. And at the time he took it over, he had no prospects at all. Now he has basically a full protected list. So Xavier Smith has worked some wonders with the Dynasty franchise. But Xavier, when I reached out to him, because like I said, it was a surprise, I reached out to Xavier and he explained that he's actually taken on a new role or a new job with Upper Deck Sports Cards in Los Angeles. He's a photo editor there, and this is a busy time of the year for them, and his job's not going to slow down anytime soon. And as you know, it's a lot to manage a franchise in the UFHL. It's not a full-time job, but it's a full commitment for sure. And so his plate's full at work, and he just wanted to perhaps take a step back and explore bringing on. He posted that he'd look at anything. He'd look at an assistant GM, another director of scouting. He has Brian Hernandez and Californication Scouting, who will stay in the fold as well. But he was looking for, and then he said, you know what, I'll accept applications for a GM job to take essentially full control of the day-to-day operations. And so my understanding is they're very close to announcing that Five Eyes Scouting Service will be incorporating and joining forces with the Dynasty franchise. And I believe that's going to be on the investment level as well. I think there's going to be an ownership share, a stake in Dynasty as part of this deal for the Five Eyes Scouting Service, which are three guys from the Edmonton area, Trevor Zimmer, Nolan Reinhardt, and Jeremy Latta. And those three guys have been doing great work as a scouting service, but sort of quietly going about their business. They haven't been super vocal on Telegram, but they've added some. When you take a look at their scouting list and you research those prospects, they've identified a lot of really good future talent. And so they're good hockey minds. They have a good feel for the game. And now it looks like that announcement could be imminent, that Five Eyes Scouting Service and Dynasty will be teaming up here in the not too distant future, possibly announced as early as tonight. And it'll be great to have those three guys joining all the UFHL groups on Telegram and being part of the community. Again, with still 10 days to the trade deadline, we could see some more activity out of Dynasty with three more voices on that franchise and the direction that Dynasty is going to head.
Well, I got to say, I don't think anybody has done a better job in retooling the roster. And there's been a lot of it. Adam Stevens did a terrific job with the Outlaws before he stepped away for health reasons, and now he's back with Red Army. But to take what Dynasty was, legitimately they could be tied with us in the bottom because that roster, it was a bit of a tire fire because of what happened, and these guys did an amazing job. So I think that there should be consideration for these guys and this franchise as one of the best stories this season, and certainly up for GM of the year, because that has been an incredible job of what they did. That roster was decimated, as I think you mentioned. So I've been really, really impressed. A lot of guys have done a lot of things, and girls have done a lot of really great things with their rosters, but I don't think anybody has had to overhaul it as much as these guys.
Yeah, and you nailed it. I think if the vote was tomorrow on GM of the year, I think Xavier Smith and Dynasty would certainly get some of those votes. And we do have a GM of the year award in the UFHL. But I think looking to the future and the fact that Xavier is very tied up and busy with his career with Upper Deck, and that's obviously a nice brand to be attached to as well. And being able to work in sports is cool. And I think he wants to make his work his focus, and the UFHL is a big time commitment. So to have three extra guys there to help you and then still retain, a majority ownership stake in the franchise, I think it's has the potential to be a win-win. I think Dynasty's identified a good group to partner up with, as well as still having Californication there with Brian as well, who I know Brian's taking on a bigger role as well with some of a new sport that's coming down the pipe later this year for Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports. So Brian has another commitment coming as well. But I think just the partnership here between Dynasty and Five Eyes Scouting Service, Trevor, Jeremy, and Nolan, whatever roles they decide to fall into, one of them is going to stay on the scouting side and not be an owner, because owners can't be scouts in the UFFS model. So one of the three will stay as the scout or the director of scouting, and then the other two will likely assume GM and assistant GM, with, I guess you could call Xavier now the president of hockey operations for Dynasty. But we'll let Xavier roll out that announcement. I know it's coming, if not today, soon in the coming days. But another very exciting announcement, and I think a potential win-win partnership.
How about former GM now, Colin Mills? What's happening with him?
So Colin Mills was let go by the Yetis, or parted ways. That's the door that opened for Scott Lowater. As we know, that was a sort of an unfortunate situation with Jace Harlick and the LTIR situation there, where he wasn't taken off LTIR at the appropriate time, and it cost the Yetis a number of fantasy points and a number of places in the standings. So Colin Mills is now currently on the sidelines, but I reached out to Colin, and he's in good spirits. I don't think this is the last we've heard of Colin Mills in the UFHL. I think he's going to focus for the time being on his scouting agency, which is the Farm Scouting Services. He's got some players of interest there, especially with the expansion draft looming. He has some goaltenders in particular that are they meet the minimum exposed requirements, and he's got some players that teams are going to want to expose in the expansion draft. So I think he'll have some business coming his way with the Farm Scouting Services. But I do think Colin Mills will resurface in the UFHL before long, likely potentially for next season. And the team to watch, in my opinion, is the Mystics. I think the Mystics, he's got some ties to the Mystics organization, and I think that's a place where we could see Colin Mills resurface in the UFHL, if not as GM, perhaps as an assistant GM or something along those lines. But I think he'll have a role with the Mystics going forward. And I do think Colin is a quality hockey mind. I've known Colin for quite a few years as well, worked together at the Hockey Writers, and he's got good analytic mind, a good hockey guy. He came up with some of the good ideas in forming sort of some of the new rules for the UFHL for this season. So we'd like to see Colin back in a role, and I think we will. I think we'll see him land potentially with the Mystics, but I'm sure he has his resume dusted off. And again, like I said, a bit of a tough break that it cost him this coveted job with the Yetis as one of the real front-running franchises, Connor McDavid as their franchise player in the UFHL. So, but I think Colin Mills will regroup, and I think we'll see Colin Mills down the road again.
Well, I think that's really good and really important to point out that he unfortunately had this situation with LTIR, and that's every owner's or GM's own responsibility. But we've seen people in this league, as it is very new, not like the way things have gone, and they've left and they've bolted. And it's good on Colin that he sees the value of staying in this platform, and he has the scouting situation, and he will get back into it. And as you mentioned, he has made some pretty good suggestions. So good on him to say, hey, this one didn't go my way, but I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, and let's stick with this and circle back and get on another franchise possibility. So that's good news, and I think it shows that he sees the value in this system.
I think a costly mistake, right? The fact that it cost him his job, but I think a learning experience more than anything, and not just for Colin. Everybody else got to learn through Colin's mistake, right? So everybody's going to be paying closer attention to LTIR and making sure they manage that as far as getting players on and off LTIR and alerting the league when that happens. So I think a learning experience more than anything, and a costly mistake, but a learning experience. And I think Colin, lesson learned, he's ready to regroup and hopefully make a triumphant return to the UFHL.
All right. It was kind of an interesting week in the UFHL as things heated up after it was kind of quiet for a little while.
It was, and you talked about it off the top of the show, Dean. Sometimes these things come in waves, and there was certainly the calm before the storm this week. You look at our show last week on March 26th, there was no trades in the UFHL. And there was barely any open market ads. It was almost radio silence through last weekend and all the way up to Wednesday, from March 26th to March 30th, 5 days, there was no trades, which is unheard of in the UFHL, especially with the trade deadline only, at that time, a few weeks away. And so I put out a feeler on Monday on the Telegram chats and just said, it's been a pretty quiet start to the week for the Insider. And I actually had a handful of GMs almost immediately within the hour DM me and say, hey, it's not quiet. Things are like I said, heating up behind the scenes. There's lots of talks and lots of smoke, but still it looked like it was going to be a slow news week, and we'd be sitting here on Friday, trying to be like the Elliot Friedmans and Darren Dreigers, where they're almost trying to make news and, generate that smoke and get everybody believing in that there will be it won't be a dud of a deadline, right? And I was starting to get concerned with, so many teams so close to the salary cap that maybe there wouldn't be the ability to make some blockbuster moves. But lo and behold, Wednesday arrived, and now we have more than enough to talk about. We had 12 trades in the last 48 hours, 6 trades on Wednesday and 6 more on Thursday as the calendar flipped to April. So we got a full plate of trades, and a lot of them were of the blockbuster variety. So looking forward to breaking down some of these trades today.
All right, well, let's start then with what the Yetis did, and it's particularly what the new GM did. And we'll bring up this graphic with the amount of players in and out. This is like, you might not see this from season to season from some teams.
Yeah, and again, to do that in your first 2 days on the job, to move out players of that caliber, Artemi Panarin, Mitch Marner, Anthony Mantha. Thomas Hertl was acquired and flipped, so he was in and out within those trades. Zach Werenski on the blue line, no longer there. But then you look at the guys that Scott Lowater was able to bring in, guys like Ryan O'Reilly and Dylan Larkin and, really upgraded the depth of the franchise, right? And I think that was the goal here for the Yetis. Colin built this franchise on the three-headed monster up front. Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner, Artemi Panarin, all over $10 million in salary. Three players essentially taking up 20% of the total cap. Scott Lowater, a new GM, they want to put their mark on the franchise. And that was what they identified, was that, maybe we're too top heavy here. Let's get some more depth. And you look at the names, they might not be the marquee, the Hart Trophy candidate names, but just the depth that they've accumulated up front, and then land a game-breaking guy like Tyson Barrie on the back end, who's been one of the best fantasy defensemen this season. So if he can keep it going in Edmonton and perhaps sign an extension there, that trade looks good. But the biggest blockbuster that they made of all of them was they traded Mitch Marner and Zach Werenski to the Stingrays in exchange for that trade brought back Sean Couturier, Cam Atkinson, and Tyson Barrie. So a 2-for-3. And the Stingrays filled that empty hole that they gave up by acquiring Pat Maroon from the Battlehawks for some futures, essentially, for 4 prospects that were sort of later round draft picks. But you look at all the work, all in a day's work for Scott Lowater and the Yetis, but really overhauled that roster. And again, you look at 16 players out. There's only a 23-man roster. Granted, a handful of those guys are from the protected list and 1 draft pick, but you could say they overturned half their roster within 2 weeks to the trade deadline. So some mega moves there by the Yetis, and really it signifies the changing of the guard, because Colin didn't make a ton of moves with the Yetis. He made a handful of trades over his almost 6 to 9 months on the job. His biggest trade prior to the season, back in October when he was hired, was Artemi Panarin. He acquired Artemi Panarin, I believe, from the Red Army in exchange for Adam Fox, Ilya Samsonov, and a 2020 first-round pick that was slotted at 23rd overall back in October. So he brought in Artemi Panarin, and for Artemi Panarin now to be traded within the first days of a new GM, again, it just shows when a new GM comes in, the changing of the guard. And I think we saw that in full force this week with the Yetis.
Well, some of the moves that I particularly like that they did make, I love the pickup of the Tyson Barrie. I mean, you said it. They had so much money tied up in those players, and yeah, you are giving away a terrific player, or not giving away. You're trading away a terrific player in Mitch Marner. But man, this is a defenseman that is going to help, that obviously has a lower cap hit. I love the Brendan Gallagher pickup. I mean, that guy's almost 4 points a game in fantasy and hits all these different categories. And you have to look at it. The Yetis were trying it, and it was working, but they lost a lot of points. And now they're looking at saying, hey, let's get a little bit more depth. And when we talk about depth, okay, so Sean Couturier isn't Mitch Marner, but Sean Couturier is still a very good player in fantasy hockey and the NHL. So you have to decide. Some GMs want to go top heavy. Others want to have a little bit more depth. And a new GM wants to come in and put his stamp on it. And certainly that was the situation here.
Yeah, and so 2 of the 3, right? 2 of the big 3 are now gone, Artemi Panarin and Mitch Marner. So if anybody's wondering, the answer is no. Connor McDavid is still untouchable. He's not available. They won't be moving all 3 of the big 3. So Connor McDavid remains the franchise player for the Yetis. Scott Lowater's an Alberta boy, originally from Cold Lake, now down in that Lethbridge, Coaldale area for the past 20 years. And the franchise owners, Braden Stevenson and Alan Schmidt, co-owners, are also very keen on keeping Connor McDavid. There's no financial offer or hockey deal that can be made for Connor McDavid. So scratch that name off your list as a potential Yeti on the move before the trade deadline. But who knows? Maybe they're not done yet. But you look at the work they've done in the last 48 hours, and you nailed it, Dean. The depth is so key there. You look at what, heaven forbid, Connor McDavid did get hurt down the stretch. They're not going to lose nearly as much ground in the standings now with that many. You look at their group of 12 forwards, and it's a deep group now. There's no filler there, so they'll pick up the slack if they have an injury. And again, you really look towards the playoffs, right? A guy like Ryan O'Reilly or some of these guys, Brendan Gallagher, guys that they brought in that could be big-time playoff performers. Tyson Barrie with the Oilers if they go on a run. So even a guy like Mike Smith, right? If he gets the crease for Edmonton in the playoffs, that's upgrade there as a backup goalie that you can in the expansion draft. Mackenzie Blackwood's your guy going forward. But some handy work there by Scott Lowater to learn the league that quickly in a matter of, within a week of putting forward his candidacy and of never really paying close attention to the UFHL to be making this level of moves. It is impressive. And what's maybe most impressive that we haven't talked about is when he took over this franchise, they had $750,000 in cap space. They now have over $6.5 million in cap space. So not only did he move that much in and out, he gave himself the cap flexibility for the Yetis going forward as well. So just like I said, some real handy work by Scott Lowater to be able to make that many moves when you're that tight to the cap and walk away with a deeper roster and more cap space. Successful start, safe to say, for Scott Lowater with the Yetis.
Yeah, totally. Now, when we started this interview, when we started recording this, I kid you not, it started snowing outside my window here in St. Albert. And I think that's because there has a local star coming home to St. Albert in the UFHL. I think that was kind of just like a signal that, King Pareco has come home.
Yeah, how fitting, hey? Colton Pareco coming back to St. Albert and bringing a former Brandon Wheat King in tow with Matt Calvert. I know Duckmans has a real affinity for former Brandon Wheat King, so good to see Matt Calvert in. But, of course, Colton Pareco, he's been on LTIR much of this season for the St. Louis Blues, but a big, impactful defenseman who has the big shot, can put up some fantasy points as far as goals and assists. But he's got that snarl, that aggressive side. And you look at the leaders in the UFHL in defense, and you see Darnell Nurse right at the top. And Colton Pareco is a Darnell Nurse type defenseman. He's got a similar skill set, and he brings the hits, the shots, the PIMs. We talked about Brent Burns last week as another guy who gets, a volume shooter who has a lot of hits and a decent amount of penalty minutes. But I think Colton Pareco's future with Duckman's domination as sort of one of the new faces of the franchise, if not the face of the franchise. I know Nolan Patrick's there and Dante Fabro and some young, exciting prospects are coming up, but Colton Pareco might be wearing the C for Duckman's domination sooner than later. And that's a trade when you look at it. Again, another one of those win-win trades, because with the Outlaws, Colton Pareco wasn't doing any good for them on the LTIR and potentially being out for the rest of this season, or, certainly not maybe taking a while to get up to speed if he does return. But the Outlaws are, they're in the top 5. They're pushing to, maybe get into that top 3. And I think they looked at it as let's free up that cap space. Not that Pareco has a bad contract, but it's a decent amount of money that they can free up and bring in a healthy body that can make it an immediate impact for the Outlaws. So they did it more as a cap dump. And of course, Duckman's domination being at the lower end of the standings and rebuilding, you guys had all the cap room in the world. You didn't even have to check Cap Friendly to see where Colton Pareco fits into the picture. But you look at the trade as a whole, Mark Jankowski and Tyler Benson. I like Tyler Benson, but, he at this point in his career, he's not a surefire NHL player or a surefire top 6 forward. And Mark Jankowski, another guy who's sort of still finding his way in the league, trying to get some traction in Pittsburgh. But you give up those two guys as well as a first-round pick belonging to West Coast Express, so a mid-first and then a 2022 second-round pick. With the amount of picks Duckman's domination has over the next 3 years, and then the fact you had 6 first-rounders for 2021, still have 5. I look at the trade as a whole as Duckman's domination got a future face of the franchise, a proven talent in Colton Pareco, so you got to like that. And Outlaws, they turned around and used a bit of that cap space right away by acquiring Alexander Wenberg. And kind of a funny story there. It's another St. Albert boy leaving the Outlaws in Ian Mitchell. So they traded away 2 defensemen, St. Albert products, in Colton Pareco and Ian Mitchell. And really what they did is created cap space and did fill a little bit of it with Alexander Wenberg. But Outlaws still have, upwards of that 5-6 plus million cap space. They could add an impact player before the deadline on April 12th to really push them towards the top 3 and make things interesting down the stretch. But you got to love Colton Pareco's homecoming.
Well, we look at it in a couple of ways from this trade. And, Craig and I talked about it on Tracking the Draft that came out on Thursday this week about dealing from a position of strength. And you mentioned that. The picks we still have 5, so we're good that way. I also like Tyler Benson, but I look at how crowded that top 6 is getting for the Edmonton Oilers and his career path. And I'm not sure that, I'm not as high on him maybe now as I was. I still think he's going to be a good player, but I look at Colton Pareco, and who's gone from the St. Louis Blues now? Alex Pietrangelo. That spot is open for Colton Pareco to take and become. And a good comparison is Darnell Nurse, and he's young. And, we build on the back end with the two foundation, Fabro and Pareco, is not a bad back end to build around as we go forward. And that's our MO. We'll use the draft picks if we have them during the auction and stockpile our future, or we'll use them to try and get players. And the other thing that worked in our favor is that they're in a situation where they're thinking about expansion as well and not just losing a guy. So there are teams out there that we have our list, and let's target these guys for a goalie potentially, these guys for this defenseman. Instead of losing them or instead of making a deal with the expansion team, we can make deals with those teams and they get at least something for that. So it's not just the expansion team that will be looking to make those kind of deals. It's other teams kind of swooping in on some of the clubs that maybe are in a bit of a bind right now.
That's so smart. And to be able to upgrade your keeper spots or your protected spots between now and that July 17th deadline to submit protected lists, and Duckmans and Tornadoes and some of these franchises that are rebuilding, they have a number of spots that they can fill. And for those other franchises, anything's better than nothing, right? You're going to lose a player regardless. You may as well take what you can get for a player that can fit in somebody else's protected list. So that's maybe the first opportunity, Colton Pareco, but it won't be the last. Duckmans will be able to add a number of quality upgrades, I believe, on the cheap. Some buy low guys like Blizzard did with Marcus Johansson. But you have the cap space. You can weaponize that, and you can certainly also weaponize the fact that the expansion draft is looming, and some people are well over their limit. And whether you can do that before the trade deadline on April 12th, because a lot of those franchises will want to ride that out and have those guys for the playoff run. But there's going to be a window following the season in early July until July 17th where Duckmans can really get busy and really upgrade their talent level by grabbing some of these players before the expansion franchise has a chance to get them. And circling back to Tyler Benson, I think, Dylan Holloway hasn't signed with the Oilers yet, but that sounds like it's inevitable that, he could go back to college again and potentially be Wisconsin's captain next season and have another Hobey Baker candidate type year because he had the broken thumb and he can't play this year anymore. But I think Dylan Holloway, you look at that left wing depth chart for Edmonton, I think Dylan Holloway, with the year he had at Wisconsin, has overtaken Tyler Benson likely in that depth chart as the top six left winger. So I think Tyler Benson, he'll likely be exposed as well to the Seattle Kraken, I would assume. So it'll be interesting to see how Tyler Benson's career goes from here, because he had such a good year in the AHL last season. This season, not as much. But although that line down there with Benson, Marody, and Ryan McLeod has been lighting it up for Bakersfield, and maybe we'll see Tyler Benson have a successful NHL career. And I'm sure the Outlaws are hoping that he can be a productive player for them down the road. But they were doing it for cap space, and Duckmans had more than enough cap space to bring home Colton Pareco.
Maybe that'll be like a kid third line or something like that. Those guys when they come up from the AHL, we'll see. But I agree with you. Dylan Holloway, I think, is surpassed. Okay, let's talk about West Coast Express now. They were also busy, maybe not as busy by the Yetis, but still some impressive stuff by the West Coast.
Yeah, Aaron Bell and Brandon Kohinski were the other big movers, or the second busiest franchise over the past week, pulling off 4 trades, 4 separate deals. And of course, like you said, overshadowed by the Yetis, just because the Yetis made, 5 deals to their 4 and had guys like Panarin and Marner moving out. But you look at the work that West Coast Express did, acquiring guys like Thomas Hertl and Frank Vetrano, and they were the franchise that brought in Ian Mitchell. And I look at the Yetis, they have a nice cushion right now over Dynasty, the franchise we talked about, for that 4th playoff spot in the Howe division. There's about 150 points there. So West Coast Express is comfortably in the playoffs, but maybe don't think they can pull off an upset in the first round. So they're starting to look to the future. And guys like Lucas Alvinas and Ian Mitchell are guys that could boost West Coast Express going forward, as well as, Thomas Hertl has a pretty nice contract, and Frank Vetrano's a productive player who hits a lot of categories in the UFHL. But speaking of that, you give up a guy like Brendan Gallagher, who's very much like Frank Vetrano. in a lot of ways. But one thing with Gallagher is he's on a cheap contract this year, and his extension kicks in next season. So that's a big bump that the Yetis now have to take on with Gallagher's new contract. So a bit of salary cap juggling here for West Coast Express, and they're right up against the cap. They're actually the closest to the cap now, West Coast Express. I believe they're within $200,000 from the cap. So they knew they wouldn't have room for Brendan Gallagher next season, so they were able to do some maneuvering here and bring in a lot of guys that maybe have more of a future with West Coast Express as opposed to moving Gallagher in the offseason when his new contract kicks in. But all in all, West Coast Express was the second busiest franchise, pulling off 4 trades, only to be overshadowed and upstaged by the Yetis.
Yeah, it was, man, I can't imagine how busy all those transactions must have taken for you. And, when we get that site, it's going to be a lot more streamlined. But, man, it's kind of like going back to the old school days before the internet. I remember being in fantasy and you actually phoned a guy. I remember actually missing a story in Brandon. I couldn't get to go do a story because I was wrapped up in a fantasy trade. Luckily, it was with my sports director, so I didn't get in that much trouble, but it's kind of like the old school days where you're burning up the phone lines with all those kind of transactions. Clearing cap space. A lot of teams have been doing that. We're taking on that cap space, but there are teams that are working hard on that.
Yeah, I think, again, looking to the future, right? Especially teams that are now, franchises that are now clearly going to miss the playoffs. They're not going to be part of the playoff draft. They're in next year mode. And one of those franchises, largely due to injuries this season, the Warriors, with Sean Cosgrove, who has been fairly quiet on Telegram and hasn't really, fully jumped into the UFHL. But I know Sean from 2 other leagues. I know he's a very active GM owner, and I think we're going to see a lot more from the Warriors going forward. But they took a look at their salary cap situation and only had, I believe it was $745,000 in cap space. And knowing that Elias Pedersen and Philip Heidel both needed new contracts for next season coming off their entry-level deals. So, I mean, you can do the math there. You're not going to be able to fit those guys in. And they have a lot of guys that are locked up long-term, guys like Blake Wheeler and guys that Zach Parise still. Some of these veteran guys with longer, big money contracts, they had to make room for Elias Pedersen. And the way they did it was by moving Anders Lee, who, has, I believe he's got, 5 more seasons at $7 million. Sorry. Yeah. Locked up for 5 more seasons after this year at $7 million. They moved Anders Lee as a cap dump to Dynasty in exchange for Andreas Athanasiou and Pittsburgh defense prospect Josh Maniscalco, who was one of those college signings that looks like he has some upside down the road, a name to potentially keep in mind. But generally speaking, that was a cap dump for the Warriors to offload Anders Lee in order to make room for the inevitable mega contract for Elias Pedersen. I don't know if he'll get Mitch Marner money because, I don't think he'll get the $10 million. It hasn't been a great year for Elias Pedersen in Vancouver with injuries, and he's been sidelined. But a talented face of the franchise for Vancouver, he's going to get paid on this second contract because that's the trend in the NHL. Not as many bridge deals anymore. The second contract's a big one. So, Elias Pedersen only at coming off his entry-level contract there at, what is he? I think right around, under $1 million, 925,000 cap hits. So you can almost add a 0 on the end of that, right? He's probably going to be somewhere in that 9 million, 7 to 9 million range. So now West Coast Express has opened up a significant amount of cap space. They have, the Warriors now have 6.5 million in cap space after offloading Anders Lee for Andreas Athanasiou. So they created that 6.5 million in cap space. And they also have a guy like Derek Ryan coming off the books this summer. He's at 3.125 million. You look down their list, guys like Ryan Getzlaff, and then going over to Dynasty with Xavier Smith, they bring on Anders Lee, who they immediately placed on LTIR. And it actually, if he wasn't on LTIR, Dynasty would be over the salary cap. So they had some cutting to do for this season and some maneuvering, but Anders Lee's out for the rest of the season, so that's not a concern. And then you look at next season for Dynasty, Ryan Getzlaff at 8.25 million. He's going to be significantly lower on his next contract, as well as Alex Edler at 6 million. Both those guys are pending free agents. I assume Dynasty will retain them on the expectation that they're going to be coming in at about half that for salary. You know, Ryan Getzlaf won't get more than Alexander Edler probably won't get more than $5 million. So they're going to take a haircut, and that'll open up that cap space to have Anders Lee the money they needed to keep Anders Lee on the roster going forward long term as one of the new faces of the Dynasty franchise, the captain of the New York Islanders. And I think Dynasty, you know, again, with Five Eyes Scouting Service getting involved, you can look further down the road, look to 2 years. You got Jeff Carter and Mikko Koskinen coming off the books at a combined $10 million. So, and you can release those guys to free agency, or you can retain them and inherit their new contract. But you're right, a lot of franchises in the UFHL are, especially the ones that are out of the playoff picture, are really starting to take a look at their cap space and their long-term projection into next season and beyond for the way their salaries and their cap hits are aligning in order to be cap compliant for next season and really to have that room for your entry-level guys that re-sign, because that's maybe the insider advice as well, is you got to know which guys are on ELCs and how big their next contract's going to be, because if they go from 900,000 to 9 million, you got to have that room. And if you don't make the room now, like the Warriors did with Anders Lee, then you're in a real pickle when Elias Pedersen signs for 9 million and you're 9 million over the cap. You won't even get Andreas Athanasiou and Josh Maniscalco in return. You'll get next to nothing because you're over the cap and they know it, and your rivals aren't going to throw you a bone or a life preserver if you're $9 million over the cap. So good on Sean Cosgrove for taking the initiative and getting that move done prior to the trade deadline and prior to Elias Pedersen's mega contract that he's likely to sign this summer.
All right, before we get to insider advice, let's quickly talk about what else the Stingrays did and what's going on with the Gators.
Yeah, so the Stingrays landed Patrick Maroon to kind of fill the extra hole when they gave up both Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson in exchange for the big fish, Mitch Marner. The Stingrays had an open forward spot. They were able to acquire Patrick Maroon from the Battlehawks for 4 prospects, guys that were mid to late round picks, so guys that aren't going to hurt their immediate future or necessarily their long-term future project type prospects. But certainly Pat Maroon, we talked last week in the insider advice about identifying guys that could be playoff performers and guys that hit a lot of categories in the UFHL. And Patrick Maroon, you know, back-to-back Stanley Cup champion, the only player who's won back-to-back Stanley Cups with Tampa Bay and with St. Louis. So you can't get a much better playoff performer than Patrick Maroon, and a guy who hits all categories. So with an eye to the playoff draft and the UFHL playoffs and the fact the Stingrays are climbing the standings, you know, they went from 10th to 9th to 8th, now into 7th place for the first time, actually overtaking the Yetis. And that's going to be super cool to watch, Dean, because let's take a look at the Lemieux division and the standings there. You have the Yetis and the Stingrays are battling for 2nd and 3rd. Well, guess what? That's a first-round playoff matchup. Almost locked in there with the 2nd and 3rd seeds. We're going to see the Stingrays and Yetis slug it out in the first round. Scott Lowater and Arlo Scholz, and they came together for that massive blockbuster. Mitch Marner, Zach Werenski for Sean Couturier, Cam Atkinson, and Tyson Barrie. Those guys are all going to be going head-to-head in the first round of the playoffs in the Lemieux division. So the Stingrays added some muscle and some peripheral categories with Patrick Maroon and a guy who could go deep in the playoffs again with Tampa Bay. So a nice pickup there. And then the Gators are one of the teams that are franchises that haven't made any moves recently, but they did update their trade bait board, and they're willing to or wanting, it's beyond willing, they're wanting to move either Keith Yandel or Jacob Slavin, 2 big name defensemen, Slavin and Yandel, and they would like a similar caliber, star forward, top 6 forward back in return. They're not looking for futures. They're looking for a hockey deal, a win now move, but they would like to take from the defense and add up front. So if anybody's looking to move, it can be a fairly big contract. They have $5 million plus in cap space, so they could take on a Mitch Marner type guy for a Keith Yandel or Jacob Slavin. So I think between now and April 12th trade deadline, I think the Gators are going to swing a big move out one of their big name blue liners, either Yandel or Slavin, and likely land a key forward for the stretch run.
All right, let's get to insider advice and what's happening with salary retention and that topic.
Well, that was a hot topic at last year's owners' meetings, and it actually went to a vote and was voted down. The UFHL didn't want salary retention and the ability to retain salary in trades for 2 reasons. One, the fact that it changes the contracts in the UFHL, especially if you're retaining salary on a guy with 3 or 4 years left. That contract is no longer mirroring the NHL because the salary that would be traded again years down the road wouldn't be the same as the NHL. So you get the contract side of it, and then the parity side, right? If Red Army now can take on a bunch of guys at half price or whoever, they can stack that roster that much more by using retained salary and salary retention through trades. But when you look at it, and this is just me spitballing, is I know Colin Mills was one guy and Donnie Talk from Kamikaze another that are very big proponents of salary retention. And I think it's something that will be revisited at the off-season owners meetings in August. I think it'll be an annual topic to be discussed. But where I was looking at it, again, and this insider advice was more so coming from the slow news week, the slow start, and the fact so many teams were so close to the cap and thought maybe we wouldn't see much activity leading up to the deadline because of the salary cap. And so when I looked at that, I thought, what if you come up with a specific rule, a UFHL rule, where you could have retained salary, but only in the month of the trade deadline and only on pending unrestricted free agents. So only on the rental players. Because in the NHL, Eric Stahl, these type of guys, generally speaking, you're seeing retained salary on pending unrestricted free agents, the guys that are classified as a rental. And I think there's room for that type of salary retention in the UFHL. So I think it'll be revisited, and you could put those two rules in place that salary retention can only be used in the month of the trade deadline and only used on rentals. So then you would get the actual rental marketplace leading up to the trade deadline to mirror the NHL. And one thing there was another debate or part of the vote was, if you do allow salary retention in trades, can cash be involved? Can the cash considerations be what you take back? And of course, that was voted down as well. But when you look at it, I think with salary retention, if players are moving or franchises are moving these pending unrestricted free agencies rentals at the deadline, in a lot of cases, they want to open up that roster spot. They don't want to take back 3 prospects for 1 rental because they need those open spots for their draft picks. So perhaps that's where the cash considerations, you take back 1 player, another pending free agent, maybe a lesser free agent, or you take back a draft pick, but you can get the cash considerations to balance those salary retention trades. So you don't have to take back a package of futures with multiple prospects that are going to clog up your protected list. So I think there is room for salary retention to be revisited in the UFHL going forward.
What about post deadline? In some different fantasy leagues, you're allowed to still grab guys off the waiver wire. In our league, we have a protected list. What happens post deadline?
So this is interesting, Dean, because this isn't adopted for this season, but in the NHL rule limits teams to 4 regular call-ups after the trade deadline for the stretch run, and that's 4 total. And then you can use emergency recalls beyond that. So if your roster gets below 2 goaltenders, 6 defensemen, or 12 forwards, you can bring up an emergency recall so you have the nightly roster of 20 filled, right? But other than that, you have 4 recalls total for the rest of the season. In the UFHL, through the remainder of the regular season, you still have your regular 3 call-ups per week. That was the rule that was voted in this season, was 3 call-ups per week. There's 5 weeks left in the regular season, maybe 6 now, depending what happens with the Vancouver Canucks situation and whether or not they're going to make up their games from COVID. But with 5 weeks left, if you only had 4 call-ups versus 15 call-ups, that would really change the complexion of forcing teams to really lock in their roster at the trade deadline and not be able to cycle in and out these entry-level guys that they have on their protected list. They would force the UFHL franchises to mirror the NHL and really lock in your 23-man, your 20-man roster beyond the trade deadline. So that's not going to be adopted this year, but I think it's something we'll talk about at the midseason meetings and something to look at for the future is, does the UFHL want to mirror the NHL with call-ups after the trade deadline, limited to 4 instead of 3 per week? So like I said, it would go from 15 call-ups over these next 5 weeks down to just 4 total. So an interesting thing to consider for future seasons in the UFHL.
All right, we talk mostly about what happens basically on the ice and with players and trades and things like that. But we're going to end today with something that is strictly about the franchises, and this is something kind of away from the game a little bit.
Yeah, and this is another genius idea. We can full credit to the haunch for this one, Tony Krandek, one of the founders and visionaries for UFF Sports. But he's looking at potentially proposing the idea of tokenizing franchises for shareholders, because as we mentioned, Five Eyes Scouting Service is about to buy into Dynasty at some level. That likely won't be publicly disclosed what they paid or what percentage they're getting, but they're going to have an ownership stake. We saw it earlier with Gur Doltak from Doltak Scouting Service, and his brother bought into the North Stars franchise, again, not publicly disclosed. We saw the Mystics franchise go from Sonia Kleist to Derek Keller, and that, sale or minority ownership stake wasn't disclosed. So a way to perhaps disclose these and also to increase the value and the ability for franchises to really sell to shareholders is to tokenize them. So the thinking is potentially let's make 100 Duckman's Domination. I had the old name in my head, but Duckman's Domination. Let's make 100 tokens of Duckman's, and that represents 100%. Right now, Dean Millard owns all 100 tokens. You could sell off, one token would be 1%, 30 tokens would be 30%. It would be a way to bring in shareholders onto the platform for each franchise. And because we've talked lots about bringing on investors and shareholders and selling stake in your franchise, but there is no real way to track that, and certainly the league doesn't get a cut of any of that as of now. So I think when you look at the big picture, it would be nice to be able to tokenize the franchises and allow for shareholders to bid on. I only want, because right now when the platform launches here imminently, hopefully within the next week, what you're going to see is that franchises, anybody can bid on any franchise at any time, but you're bidding on the entire franchise. I want to buy 100% of Duckmans for this amount, or Duckmans can list their franchise for, here's my asking price for 100%. But what if you only wanted to sell 20%? Or what if somebody only wanted to buy 20%? So this idea of tokenizing franchises, whether it's 100 tokens or 1,000 tokens and an equivalent percentage, but likely, 100 tokens, one token is 1%. If you own all 100, you own 100% of your franchise. But just the ability to sell portions or shares in your franchise, as well as for interested fans and followers of the UFHL to be able to purchase a small share in their favorite franchise. I think it's, like I said, another genius idea from the haunch that we'll be talking about at the midseason owner meetings. Tony will make a bit of a presentation on the thinking there and the thought process behind his latest idea.
Just another reason why this is next level fantasy sports, where we're combining gameplay and the blockchain, and these aren't just players, they're NFTs. So another reason why this is the best fantasy platform ever. Thanks as always, Larry. This was a jam-packed edition, and we'll see what happens this weekend and leading up to the next time we chat.
Yeah, Dean, we have one more insider segment prior to the trade deadline next Friday. So we'll see if we're just as busy leading up to next week's episode. But hopefully the franchises are still burning up those phone lines and those Telegram chats. And I'm sure it's going to be an interesting week to come.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
All right. Wow. That was an insider segment. Holy smokes. There's always, well, I shouldn't say there's always, because we did talk about how there's a bit of a lull, but there's always something to talk about on Fridays, definitely, in UFHL Now insider segment with Larry Fisher. So big thanks to Larry for putting all that work into finding out some pretty good details, and the insider advice is always worth tuning in for. Okay, before we wrap things up, I told you we were going to have a special guest joining us for our merchandise giveaway. We're going to reveal who is going home with some sweet, sweet merchandise, a shirt and a mug, courtesy of UFFS. So you'll be able to pick whatever the logo you like, and you'll get your sweet gear. So, to join us now, let's get to our special guest and reveal who is the winner. All right, it is awesome to be here with the great one. And by that I mean Trish Millard, owner of High Level Scouting in the UFHL. She's hanging out with Greta anyway. You're not nearly as tall as Wayne Gretzky, but you are a great one. Okay, we have a bunch of names in this Dodgers World Series championship hat. She's going to draw the name and tell us who is winning some UFHL merchandise. So, great one, take over.
Okay. And we have, let's see.
The suspense is killing me.
If only I could open it. Gators!
Congratulations to the Gators. Thank you, Mrs. Millard, and the great one. All right, so congratulations to Matt Gunn of the Gators, who was, I think he said he liked the Ice Vikings logo, if I remember correctly, on that tweet. And of course, big thanks to the great one, Trish Millard, and that Gretzky guy for appearing in the background. Hopefully we don't have to pay any licensing fees to Mr. Wayne Gretzky for that. Reminder, the trade deadline 10 days away from today as of this recording. It's going to be fast. It's going to be furious. Duckman's Domination will be putting their trade block list on Telegram very shortly. And so we don't have a lot of players, but we have a few that you may be interested. A big thanks to Larry Fisher for joining me on this program, and the entire group at Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports for letting me be a part of this crazy fun show and this Ultimate Fantasy Franchise platform that we have. It is just simply outstanding. The sky's the limit, and maybe that isn't even a limit for these guys because there is so much going on. Speaking of that, here's what we have going on the UFSN. The UFFS podcast every Sunday. Big one coming out this weekend. You will not want to miss what we are revealing this weekend. Fantasy Hockey Time with myself, Monday mornings at 8 a.m. 2 Minute Tuesday with Mr. Darren Bates. We have Tracking the Draft with Craig Button on Wednesdays. Had to come out on Thursday this week because Craig would tied up, but some really cool scouting tips on that show. And then this, UFHL Now, here on Fridays. And, of course, we are looking for more programming. So if you have a fantasy sports show and you would like to join us, please hit us up and let us know. That is going to wrap things up for me on this show. Reminder, we have the UFFS podcast this Sunday with Darren Bates and Larry Fisher. Of course, happy Easter, and get in on the Score Past Win Zil contest that we have going on right now on Telegram. Have a good weekend in fantasy, everybody, and I will talk to you next week.
UFHL Now is produced by DM Productions. To get in touch, head to www.podcastalley.ca.